She offered her hand to the rancher who saved her mother, but his answer broke her heart. The wagon lay crooked in the bottom of a dry creek bed, one wheel splintered like a broken bone, and the canvas torn loose by the wind. Dust moved over everything in thin brown sheets. It clung to the trunks, the scattered blankets, the cracked lantern, and the young woman kneeling in the dirt with both arms wrapped around an older woman who burned with fever beneath a faded shawl. Caleb Rusk reined his horse hard at the ridge and stared down at the wreck. For a moment he did not move. He had ridden out from Mercy Ridge Ranch before sunrise to check a stretch of fence near the south pasture. The morning had promised nothing more than loose wire, restless cattle, and maybe rain by evening if the clouds kept gathering over the western hills. He had not expected to find a wagon overturned where no wagon ought to be. He had not expected to hear a woman's voice carrying up from the creek bed, hoarse from crying and too tired to cry any longer. "Please," she called, though she did not seem to know whom she was calling to. "Mama, stay with me, please stay." Caleb swung down before his horse had fully stilled. The young woman lifted her head when his boots slid down the bank. She had dark hair pinned badly beneath a travel bonnet, gray eyes ringed with sleeplessness, and dust across one cheek where tears had cut pale lines through it. Her dress had torn at the cuff. One hand held a tin cup, empty now, while the other gripped the older woman's fingers as if holding on hard enough might keep death from taking notice. Caleb took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, low and careful, "are you hurt?" The young woman looked at him, as if the question had come from very far away. "I don't think so," she whispered. "Not badly. My mother fell against the trunk when the wagon tipped. She was already sick before that, but now she's burning. She keeps drifting off. I can't wake her proper." Caleb knelt beside the older woman. Her face was thin and damp, her breath shallow. Fever had put a bright flush across her cheeks, but her hands were cold when he touched them. He had seen that kind of fever before. He had seen a body fight like that, trapped between heat and chill, between staying and slipping away. Something old moved inside him, quiet but sharp. "What's her name?" he asked. "Mrs. Lillian Vale," the daughter said. "I'm Mara Vale." "Mrs. Vale," Caleb said, leaning closer, "can you hear me?" The older woman stirred, but her eyes did not open. Her lips moved around a word that never found its shape. Mara's face tightened. "She was talking yesterday," she said. "Then the storm came. The driver said he would fetch help once the rain eased, but when I woke, he was gone. Took the team and left the wagon. Said he could not risk catching the sickness." Caleb looked at the empty traces where horses had been cut loose. The dirt held fresh tracks heading toward town. His jaw worked once, but he said nothing harsh. Anger could wait, the sick woman could not. "How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday afternoon." "In the rain?" Mara looked down, shame and fear crossing her face together, though neither belonged to her. "I tried to cover her. I had one blanket still dry beneath the seat. I thought someone might pass this road." "Someone has." Caleb stood and looked toward his horse, then back toward the narrow creek bed. The ranch house was less than 3 miles away if he cut across the pasture. Town was farther, and the doctor farther still, if the doctor was even sober enough to ride this early. There were choices in life that looked like choices until a man stood close enough to see them plain. Then there was only the decent thing and the cowardly thing. He bent and slid one arm beneath Lillian Vale's shoulders, the other under her knees. Mara's hand flew out. "What are you doing?" "Taking her to my house." "Your house?" "Yes, ma'am." "You don't know us." "No. We have little money." "I did not ask about money." Her eyes filled again, but she held the tears in with a strength that looked painful. "I can walk. I can carry what I can." "You'll ride behind me once I get your mother settled across the saddle. We will come back for the trunks when there is time." "But your wife," Mara began, then stopped when she saw his face. "I have no wife." He lifted Lillian as gently as he could. The older woman gave a faint sound, and Mara stepped close at once, holding the shawl around her mother's throat. "She gets cold so quickly," Mara said. "Keep that tucked around her. Hold her steady when I mount." The ride to Mercy Ridge seemed longer than 3 miles. Clouds pressed low over the open land, dragging shadows across the yellow grass. Mara sat behind him, one arm locked around her mother and the other gripping the back of Caleb's coat. She said very little. Once, when Lillian moaned, Mara bent her face against the older woman's hair and murmured a hymn too softly for Caleb to know the words. He knew the sound of it anyway. A daughter trying to call someone back. The ranch house stood at the foot of a long rise, weathered gray boards, a stone chimney, and a porch that sagged slightly on the left side. It was not a grand place, but it was clean, tight against wind, and warm when the stove was burning. Caleb had lived there alone for 9 years, and in all that time the house had learned silence the way wood learned weather. It did not know what to do with a woman's frightened voice, or the rustle of skirts crossing the threshold. He carried Lillian into the small room off the kitchen, the one his father had once used when his back went bad during winter. The bed was narrow but sound. Mara rushed ahead to pull down the quilt, then stood back with both hands pressed to her mouth while Caleb laid her mother upon the mattress. "Water in the bucket by the stove," he said. "There are clean cloths in the chest near the window. I'll heat water and put coffee on." "I don't need coffee." "You need something." Her eyes flashed with tired pride. "I said I don't need coffee." Caleb paused at the doorway. "Then I'll make it for myself and pour too much." He left before she could answer. By dusk the room smelled of fever, damp wool, and boiled willow bark. A lamp burned low on the table. A basin of water sat beside the bed, and Mara changed the cloth on her mother's brow each time Caleb told her to rest her own hands. She did not rest them for long. Every time Lillian shifted, Mara leaned forward. Every time the older woman's breath caught, Mara stopped breathing too. Caleb moved quietly, bringing water, cutting bread, stirring broth, keeping the fire steady. He did not ask how the Vales had come to be on that road with their belongings tied in trunks. He did not ask where their menfolk were. He did not ask what ruin had pushed them west. Some questions were rude, until grief invited them in. Near midnight, Mara stood by the kitchen table with the tin cup in her shaking hands. Caleb had filled it 3 times, and 3 times she had forgotten to drink. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I am used to keeping odd hours." "I am not leaving her." "I did not tell you to." That seemed to undo something in her. She looked toward the sick room, then back at him. The lamp caught the tears in her eyes before she turned her face away. "Most people tell a frightened woman what she cannot do," she said. Caleb leaned one hand on the back of a chair. "I never found fear much improved by orders." Mara gave a small, broken laugh that was almost no laugh at all. "Then, you are the first man I have met in months who knows that." Outside, thunder rolled far beyond the hills. Inside, Lillian Vale coughed, and Mara was gone from the kitchen before the sound had ended. Caleb followed with the basin, watching as the daughter knelt at the bedside and took her mother's hand once more. The older woman opened her eyes for the first time since the creek bed. They were cloudy with fever, but they found Mara's face. "Home," Lillian breathed. Mara froze. Caleb stood in the doorway with the basin in his hands, feeling the words strike the room harder than thunder. Mara swallowed, then brushed damp hair from her mother's brow. "Not yet, Mama," she whispered, "but we are under a good roof." Lillian's eyes drifted shut again. Mara stayed bent over her, one hand still trembling against the quilt. Caleb looked at the 2 women in the lamplight and felt the past stir behind his ribs like an old wound waking. He had once been a boy beside another sickbed, holding water he could not make anyone drink, promising the dark that if life ever gave him the chance to be useful, he would not turn away. Now that chance lay in his house, feverish and fragile, while her daughter knelt beside her with nowhere else in the world to go. And before dawn came, Caleb Rusk would learn that saving a life was sometimes only the beginning of what mercy could ask from a man. By morning, Mercy Ridge Ranch no longer felt like a quiet bachelor's house. It felt like a place holding its breath. Rain had come hard before dawn, rattling against the roof and running down the window panes in crooked streams. The yard outside turned dark with mud. The corral rails shone wet under the gray sky. Inside, the stove gave off a steady heat, and the little sick room off the kitchen glowed faintly beneath the low flame of a lamp that had burned through the night. Mara Vale had not slept. She sat in the chair beside her mother's bed with a damp cloth folded in her lap, her shoulders bowed, her hair fallen loose from its pins. Every few minutes she leaned forward to touch Lillian's brow. Each time, hope rose in her face and fell again when the fever remained. Caleb stood at the doorway with a cup of coffee in one hand and a plate of biscuits in the other. "You've been awake since yesterday," he said. Mara did not look away from her mother. "So have you." "I slept some in that chair by the stove." "You closed your eyes for 10 minutes. 10 minutes counts when a man is stubborn enough." She gave him a tired glance. It was not quite a smile, but it was nearer to one than anything he had seen from her since the creek bed. Caleb crossed the room and set the plate on the small table beside the basin. "Eat one." "I can't." "You can." "I said I can't." He picked up a biscuit, broke it in half, and placed one piece beside her hand. "Then hold it until you remember how." Mara looked at the broken biscuit as if she had been handed some strange and tender thing. Her fingers closed around it slowly. "My father used to do that," she said. Caleb waited. "When I was little and would not eat because I was crying over something, he would put food in my hand and say I did not have to eat it, only hold it. Then sooner or later I would forget I was refusing." Sounds like he knew children. "He knew me." Her voice softened then thinned. "At least I thought he did." The words settled between them. Caleb heard the hurt beneath them, but he did not press. The morning was already heavy enough. Lillian shifted beneath the quilt and gave a weak cough. Mara dropped the biscuit and reached for her at once. Caleb moved too, lifting the older woman slightly while Mara held the cup to her lips. Lillian swallowed once, then turned away. "That's something," Caleb said. "It isn't enough." "No, but it's something." Mara's eyes closed for a breath. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." The doctor arrived near noon, soaked to the shoulders and smelling of wet leather, tobacco, and horse sweat. His name was Amos Bell, a narrow man with silver whiskers, careful hands, and eyes that missed very little. Caleb had sent one of his ranch hands, young Peter Dawes, into town at daybreak with orders to bring the doctor back even if he had to drag him from breakfast. Dr. Bell removed his hat at the sickroom door and took in the scene without comment. The basin, the cloths, the young woman's pale face, Caleb's rolled sleeves, the older woman breathing shallow in the bed. "How long has she burned like this?" he asked. 2 days badly," Mara answered. "Sick before that but walking, talking, then the rain." The doctor nodded and sat beside the bed. He listened to Lillian's chest, touched her throat, lifted one eyelid gently, then asked for more light. Caleb opened the curtain. Gray daylight spilled across the bed. Mara stood with both hands clasped so tightly, the knuckles whitened. At last Dr. Bell straightened. "Fever's deep, but she has strength left. Lungs are troubled, though not beyond hope. Keep her warm, not too warm. Small sips of water as often as she can bear them. Broth if she wakes enough. Cool cloths when the fever climbs. If she sweats, change the bedding quick and keep the chill off her. Mara swallowed. Will she live? The doctor's gaze softened, but he did not lie. She might. Mara looked as if those two words had struck her harder than any cruelty could have. Might, she repeated. It is the honest answer, Dr. Bell said, and honest answers are sometimes all the frontier offers. Caleb watched Mara take that in. She did not cry. Instead, she nodded once sharply as if she had accepted an order. After the doctor left medicine on the table and rode away through the rain, Caleb found Mara in the kitchen trying to wash the same cup over and over. Her hands trembled in the water. The cup slipped against the basin with a tinny clatter. You'll wear a hole through it, he said. She stopped but did not turn. I need to do something. There's plenty to do. Not enough to save her. Caleb leaned against the far counter, leaving space between them. No, maybe not. Her shoulders rose with a breath she could not steady. How do you stand saying such things plainly? Because soft words don't change hard truths. They can make them easier. For a minute. Mara turned then, and he saw anger in her eyes. He welcomed it more than the emptiness. A minute can matter, she said. When someone is afraid, a minute can be the only mercy they have. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. You're right. The anger faded from her face, leaving only exhaustion behind. She looked down at the cup in her hands. I'm sorry. No need. I should not speak harshly to you. You have done more than anyone had any right to do. That does not mean you owe me a gentle temper. Her mouth trembled at that, and she turned back toward the sink before he could see too much. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. Peter Dawes came in from the barn carrying Mara's 2 trunks, one under each arm, his sandy hair plastered to his forehead. Behind him, Caleb carried a smaller wooden box and a carpetbag rescued from the wreck. Everything was damp but not ruined. Mara knelt beside the trunks in the kitchen, running her hand over the worn leather straps as though greeting the last pieces of a life that had followed her this far. This is all? Caleb asked. She nodded. All that remained after the creditors finished being thorough. Peter looked from her to Caleb, sensed the air in the room, and wisely carried himself back out to the barn without a word. Mara opened the smaller trunk. Inside were folded dresses, a Bible, a packet of letters tied in ribbon, a silver-backed brush with a cracked handle, and a framed photograph wrapped in a shawl. She touched the photograph but did not lift it. My father was respected in Ashford, she said quietly. People stood when he entered a room. Men asked his advice. Women praised my mother for having married so steady a man. Caleb said nothing. When he died, we learned he had borrowed against nearly everything. House, shop shares, furniture, even my mother's wedding silver. He had smiled through dinners while owing money to half the county. She gave a small laugh without warmth. Grief is strange when anger comes with it. You do not know whether to mourn the person you lost or the person you discovered they had been. Caleb's face tightened with understanding he did not explain. That is a hard burden for a daughter. For my mother most of all. Mara looked toward the sick room. She defended him at first. Then the papers kept coming. Every envelope took another memory from her and made it look foolish. The house creaked around them as wind pressed against the walls. We were headed for Idaho, Mara continued. Mother's cousin has a boarding house near Clearwater Crossing. She wrote that I could help there. It was not much, but it was a place to arrive. A place to stop being ashamed in front of people who remembered us grander than we were. And now I do not know if my mother can survive another road. Caleb looked toward the sick room. Then she will not travel until she can. Mara turned to him. Mr. Rusk, we cannot pay for weeks of keeping. I didn't mention pay. You do not have to. Food costs, medicine costs, time costs. I am not so helpless that I cannot count. "No," he said, "you are not helpless at all." The words seemed to surprise her. She stared at him. Caleb stepped to the stove and poured coffee into 2 cups. "When your mother is past the worst of it, if you still need to stay, we will speak of work. There is washing, mending, cooking if you care to fight with my stove, a kitchen garden that has shamed me 3 years running, but not today." Mara took the cup he offered, and this time she drank. "Why?" she asked. Caleb looked down into his own coffee. It was a small word, but it carried everything she had not asked. Why had he stopped? Why had he carried Lillian inside? Why had he sent for the doctor? Why had he opened his quiet home to 2 ruined women without a promise of money or kinship or reward? He could have told her about his mother, about a fever from long ago, about being 14 and useless, holding a cup of water beside a bed while the world took what it wanted. But the words sat too deep, and he had not spoken them aloud in years. So he gave her the only answer he could manage. "Because leaving you, there would have been wrong." Mara watched him as if she wanted to believe life could truly be that simple in a man. Before she could answer, Lillian called weakly from the next room. "Mara!" The cup nearly fell from Mara's hand. She rushed to the bedside, Caleb close behind her. Lillian's eyes were open, clearer than before but full of pain and confusion. Mara knelt and took her hand. "I'm here, Mama." Lillian's gaze moved slowly around the room. "Where are we?" "At Mercy Ridge Ranch. Mr. Rusk brought us here." The older woman turned her head with effort. Her eyes found Caleb standing by the door. Even sick, even worn thin by fever, she had the look of a woman who had measured people all her life and trusted her judgment. "You carried me," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am." "Were we heavy trouble?" Caleb put his hat in his hands, though he stood indoors. "Not heavier than leaving you would have been." For the first time, Lillian Vale smiled faintly. "That is an answer with a spine in it," she murmured. Mara bent her head, pressing her mother's hand to her cheek. Relief crossed her face so suddenly and fiercely that Caleb had to look away. But by evening, the fever rose again. It came like a thief, quiet at first, then bold. Lillian began to shiver beneath 2 quilts while sweat dampened her hair. Her breathing roughened. The small bit of broth she had taken came back up, and Mara's hope drained from her face as if the day had betrayed her. Caleb changed the sheets. Mara held the lamp. He brought fresh water. She folded cloths. Hour by hour the storm outside passed east, but the storm in the sick room stayed. Near midnight, Mara stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the table. "She woke," she said, voice hollow. "She knew me," she smiled. "She may again." "And if she does?" Caleb had no answer kind enough. Mara looked at the 2 cups on the table, both untouched, the coffee gone cold in them. Then she looked toward the dark window where the night gave back only her own reflection. A young woman without a home, without money, without a father's name she could trust, and perhaps soon without the mother who had been her last certain place in the world. "I thought reaching Idaho would save us," she whispered. "Then I thought the wagon road would. Then I thought morning would." Her voice broke. How many things can a person hope in before hope starts to feel like another kind of cruelty? Caleb stood across from her, helpless in the face of that question. From the sick room, Lillian coughed again, a rough, frightening sound that pulled both of them still. Mara closed her eyes. And in that dim kitchen, with rainwater dripping from the eaves and her mother fighting for breath in a stranger's bed, a thought came to Mara Vale, so sudden and desperate that it frightened her more than the fever did. The thought did not leave Mara when morning came. It stayed with her while she wrung cool cloths into the basin. It stayed while Caleb carried in fresh wood and said little, his eyes shadowed from another night without real sleep. It stayed while Dr. Bell returned, listened to Lillian's chest, and gave the same honest answer as before. She is holding, the doctor said. Mara hated that word. Holding was not healing. Holding was not safe. Holding was a hand clinging to a cliff edge, fingers weakening one by one. When the doctor rode away, Mara stood on the porch and watched his horse disappear down the wet road. The storm had washed the land clean, but it had left everything raw. The grass bent beneath beads of water. The hills wore a pale mist. Mud sucked at the yard between house and barn. Behind her, Caleb stepped out with his coat unbuttoned and his sleeves rolled to the forearms. He had shaved badly in the dim light, missing a narrow strip along his jaw. For some reason, that small human failing made Mara ache. He did not say she was worse, Caleb said. No. That matters. She folded her arms tightly. You gather crumbs of comfort like a hungry man. Sometimes crumbs keep a person alive till bread comes. Mara looked at him then, and if bread never comes? Caleb's gaze moved out over the yard. Then a person learns what else can be lived on. It was not the answer she wanted. It was too plain, too worn, too true. She turned back inside before her face could show too much. All day, the house moved in quiet circles around Lillian Vale. The older woman drifted in and out of scents. Once she asked for a blue teapot that had been sold to creditors months before. Once she mistook Caleb for Mara's father and apologized for a quarrel no one in the room understood. Each time, Mara soothed her with a voice gentler than her own fear. Caleb saw everything and pretended not to see more than was useful. He made tea in the afternoon, though he said it was only because the stove was already hot. He sliced apples thin because Lillian might wake and want something sweet, though she did not. He brought a rocking chair from the parlor into the sick room so Mara could rest closer to the bed, then claimed the chair had been in his way. Mara began to understand that Caleb Rusk hid kindness the way some men hid money. He tucked it into plain tasks and hoped no one would name it. Near sunset, Peter Dawes returned from town with medicine, flour, salt, and news he had not been asked to bring. He stood just inside the kitchen door, twisting his hat in his hands while Caleb unpacked the sack. "Folks are talking," Peter said. Caleb did not look up. "Folks breathe too. I don't take special notice." Peter glanced toward Mara, then flushed. "Didn't mean offense, Miss Vale." "What are they saying?" Mara asked. Caleb's hand stilled over the flour sack. Peter swallowed. "Only that Mr. Rusk has taken in 2 ladies from the road. Some say it kindly, some don't know how." Mara knew what that meant. She had lived long enough among parlors and church steps to know that women could turn concern into a blade sharp enough to leave no blood. Caleb set the flour down. "Who said it unkindly?" Mrs. Tabor at the mercantile asked whether Miss Vale had people coming for her. Mrs. Pike said if she did, they were mighty slow about it. Mara's cheeks warmed. "That all?" Caleb asked. Peter hesitated. "Say it." She said a house with 1 unmarried man and 1 unmarried woman under the same roof gives a town more story than it needs. The kitchen went still. Mara stared at the table. Shame rose in her even though she had done nothing shameful. That was the cruel power of talk. It could make innocence feel like guilt simply by pointing at it long enough. Caleb's voice came calm and cold. "Mrs. Pike can carry her concerns to me if they are heavy." Peter nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. And if anyone asks why Miss Vale and her mother are here, you can tell them the truth. Their wagon overturned, Mrs. Vale is ill, and this ranch had a roof." "Yes, sir." If that does not satisfy them, they were not hungry for truth to begin with. Peter left soon after, grateful to escape. Mara turned away and busied herself with folding a cloth already folded. "I am sorry," she said. Caleb looked at her. "For what?" "For bringing talk to your door." "I have had talk at my door before." "Not because of me." No, for other foolish reasons. She gave him a tired, bitter smile. Does that make it lighter? A man learns most talk is wind with better posture. Mara almost laughed. Then the almost laugh hurt too much and faded. I know what people see, she said. A woman ruined by debt, a sick mother, no man to claim us, no money worth speaking of. Now we are in the house of a bachelor rancher, and charity is never allowed to stay charity in the mouths of bored people. Caleb's expression changed, not soft exactly, but firm in a way that steadied the room. You are under my roof because your mother might die if you are not. Anybody who makes that smaller than it is has a smaller soul than I care to argue with. Mara looked at him then, truly looked. He was not handsome in the polished way she had once been taught to notice. His face was browned by sun, his hands marked by work, his shoulders carrying the quiet weight of a man who had learned early not to expect ease. But there was something in him stronger than charm, a decency that did not ask to be praised, a restraint that did not weaken when no one was watching. The thought from the night before stepped closer. Not as wild now. Not as impossible. If this quiet act of kindness touched your heart, stay with Mara a little longer. Some promises are not spoken at an altar first. Some begin beside a sickbed, with a basin of water and a stranger who refuses to turn away. That evening, Lillian worsened again. Her fever climbed until even Caleb's steady face grew grave. Dr. Bell had left instructions, but instructions were thin comfort when a woman's breath grew ragged and her daughter began whispering prayers into the quilt. The lamp burned low. The kitchen fire sank to coals. Outside, coyotes called from somewhere beyond the pasture, their cries rising and falling like grief moving over the dark land. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, holding her mother upright while Caleb helped her sip water. The tin cup shook in Mara's hand until Caleb closed his fingers around it with hers. Easy, he said. I am trying. I know. She has to drink. She took some. Not enough. It may still help. Everything is may and might with you men. Mara's voice cracked. Might live, may help, could turn, could fail. Is there nothing certain in this world? Caleb did not answer at once. Then he said, there is this. She is not alone tonight. Mara looked at him over her mother's bowed head. She is warm, he said. She has water, she has you. She has a doctor who has seen her. She has a roof against the weather. Yesterday she had none of that in a creek bed. Mara's mouth trembled. That is not nothing, he said. No, she whispered, but it may not be enough. No, it may not. His honesty should have hurt her. Instead, it held her upright. By midnight, Lillian slept again, though not peacefully. Caleb convinced Mara to sit in the kitchen while he changed the bedding. She obeyed because her legs had begun to shake when she stood. The kitchen felt strange without him in it. The table held 2 cups of coffee, both untouched. The basin water had gone pink from willow bark. Her mother's shawl hung over the back of a chair to dry. Caleb's coat rested on a peg by the door, rain-stained and smelling faintly of leather and smoke. Mara looked at that coat and imagined a life built around such steady things. Coffee at dawn, mud on boots, a man who did not lie to soothe himself, a roof that did not ask what a frightened woman could pay before sheltering her. Then she hated herself for thinking of life, while her mother might still be dying. She stood, pressing both hands to the table. Fear was no gentle guest. It did not knock. It broke doors and overturned lamps. It took every thought a woman had and bent it towards survival. If her mother died, what would become of her? She had a cousin in Idaho, yes, but no money to reach her now. No team, no hired driver, no strong kin riding back to fetch her. A woman alone on the frontier was not free in the way men used the word. She was a question everyone else tried to answer for her. Work could be found, perhaps, but where? Under whose roof? At what cost to her name, her safety, her pride? She had already seen how quickly town women could make a story from Mercy. What story would they make if Lillian were gone and Mara remained? Caleb entered quietly, carrying the damp bedding. "She is settled," he said. "You can sit with her." Mara did not move. He set the bedding aside. "Miss Vale." She turned to him. The words were not ready. They had no grace, no softness, no proper beginning, but fear had been grinding them smooth inside her all day until they were the only shape left. "Mr. Rusk," she said, barely above a whisper, "if my mother does not live, I have no one." His face stilled. "I have a cousin far off, but I cannot reach her. I have no home behind me and no honest path I can see ahead. I know you did not ask for this trouble. I know you owe us nothing." "Mara," he said gently. But she pressed on because if she stopped, courage would leave her. "You are a decent man, the only decent man the road has given us. You have treated my mother with honor. You have treated me with more care than people who knew my family for 20 years. Her hands twisted together. "I can cook. I can mend. I can learn ranch work. I would not be idle. I would not shame your name." Caleb's eyes darkened with understanding. "Mara," he said again, quieter this time. She looked toward the sick-room door, where her mother's breath still rasped faintly through the dark. When she looked back, tears finally broke free, but her voice did not. "If the worst comes," she whispered, "would you marry me?" Caleb did not answer at once. The kitchen seemed to grow smaller around Mara's question. The stove ticked softly as the fire settled. Rainwater dropped from the eaves outside in slow, steady taps. From the sick room came Lillian's uneven breathing, faint and harsh enough to remind them both why the question had been spoken at all. Mara stood with her hands clasped before her, as if she were standing in church, asking for mercy she had no right to expect. "If the worst comes," she said again, her voice low, "would you marry me?" Caleb's face did not harden. That was the first thing she noticed. He did not look insulted. He did not laugh. He did not step back as if her desperation had dirtied the room. Instead, he looked grieved, and somehow that was harder to bear. "Mara," he said carefully, "you have known me 2 days. 3, if we count the creek bed. That is not enough time to choose a husband. It is enough time to know whether a man is cruel." "No," he said, "it is enough time to know whether he has not been cruel yet." The words struck her, but not because they were unkind, because they were too honest. She drew in a thin breath. "I am not a foolish girl, Mr. Rusk. I know this is not a proper courtship. I know there have been no Sunday walks, no calls in a parlor, no letters tied with ribbon. I know I am not speaking from romance." "Then what are you speaking from?" "Fear," she said, and hated how small the word sounded. But fear does not make a thing false. It can show what is standing between a person and ruin. Caleb looked toward the sickroom door, then back at her. "And you believe I am that thing?" "I believe you are honorable. I believe this house is safe. I believe my mother would be cared for here if she lives, and if she does not, I believe I could survive as your wife in a way I do not know how to survive alone." His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger but in pain. Mara forced herself to continue. "I can work. I can cook, clean, mend shirts, keep accounts. I am not asking for a fairy tale life. I am asking for a place where I would not have to fear every door I knock upon." "You already have that place." She blinked. Caleb took one slow step closer, then stopped with the table between them, as if even now he was careful not to crowd her. "You and your mother have shelter here. That is not waiting on a wedding vow. It is not something I am offering in trade." Her face warmed with humiliation. "I did not mean to make it sound like trade." "I know." "Then why do you look as if I have done something wrong?" "Because I think the wrong has been done to you long before tonight." That broke the last of her composure. Mara turned away, pressing her fingers against her mouth. She had thought he might refuse. She had thought he might accept. She had not expected him to understand her so plainly that the understanding itself hurt. Caleb's voice came softer. "Look at me, please." She did, though tears blurred him. He removed his hat from the peg beside the door. He had not worn it inside, but now he held it in both hands as if the answer deserved formality. "I will not marry a woman while she is half out of her mind with terror." Mara flinched. He saw it and continued quickly, gently. "That is not shame on you. Any daughter sitting beside her mother's sickbed would be frightened. Any woman stranded far from kin would look for ground under her feet. I do not blame you for asking. But you are saying no. I am saying not like this." The rain softened outside until the silence between drops could be heard. Mara looked down. "There is no kinder way to say no, I suppose." "There is more to it than no." Caleb's voice steadied. "If your mother lives, you both may stay until she can travel, or longer if work can be arranged and you choose it. If she does not live, you may still stay until you decide your next step with a rested mind and a clear heart. I will take you to Idaho myself if that is where you wish to go, or I will help write to your cousin, or I will speak to Dr. Bell's sister about work in town. There are choices, even if grief is hiding them tonight." Mara shook her head. "A woman alone does not have choices like a man does." "No," Caleb said, "she often does not. That is why I will not be one more man narrowing them for you." She looked at him then. He held her gaze, plain and unwavering. "If I took your yes tonight," he said, "with your mother in that bed and fear sitting at this table like a third person, I would be taking more than you truly offered. Maybe one day you would forgive me for that. I do not know that I would forgive myself." The room seemed to tilt beneath Mara's feet. She had offered herself as honestly as desperation allowed, and he had refused not because she was ruined, not because she was poor, not because he found her unworthy, but because her fear mattered to him as something that could not be used. No man had ever shown her that kind of honor. It did not feel like rejection at first. It felt like being seen in a state too fragile to bear. Then shame came anyway. Her tears slipped free. "I should not have asked." "You had every right to ask." "I sounded pitiful." "You sounded frightened." "That is not better." "It is truer." She gave a broken breath. "I have spent months trying not to be pitied." "I am not pitying you." "What do you call this, then?" Caleb's expression changed. The answer seemed to come from somewhere deeper than manners. "Respect." Mara stared at him. He set his hat on the table. "You walked west with a sick mother after losing the life you knew. You survived a wagon wreck, a storm, and a man paid to help you who chose cowardice instead. You have kept watch beside that bed until your own hands shake. You are scared because any sensible person would be. That is not weakness." The words found places in her that had gone hungry for kindness and had learned not to expect it. From the sick room, Lillian stirred and whispered something neither of them could understand. Mara wiped her face quickly and turned toward the door. Caleb stepped aside. "Go to her." She paused before passing him. "Mr. Rusk." "Yes." "If I asked again when I was not frightened." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Then I would answer the woman asking," he said, "not the fear speaking through her." It was not a promise, it was not a proposal, but it was enough to leave her heart unsteady. Mara returned to the sick room and sat beside her mother, carrying Caleb's refusal like a wound and a shelter both. Lillian's hand lay limp in hers. The fever had painted the older woman's face with a dangerous brightness, but her mouth moved faintly. "Mara," she breathed. "I'm here. Don't cry." Mara bent close, startled. "I am not crying." Even feverish, Lillian managed the faintest sound of disbelief. "You were always a poor liar." Myra pressed a kiss to her mother's knuckles. "Rest, Mama." "Good roof," Lillian whispered. "Yes." "Good man." Myra closed her eyes. Across the hall, Caleb poured the cold coffee into the wash basin and set fresh water to heat. He moved quietly, giving her privacy he had never been asked for. "Yes," Mara whispered at last, "a very good man." The hours that followed were the longest yet. Lillian's fever climbed near dawn, then held. Caleb and Mara worked without speaking unless they had to. He changed the cloths. She counted each breath. He lifted Lillian while she smoothed the sheets. She held the tin cup while he steadied her wrist without remarking on its trembling. The sky paled slowly beyond the window. When the first thin line of sunlight broke over the wet yard, Lillian began to sweat. At first, Mara feared it was another worsening. Then Caleb touched the older woman's brow and went very still. "What?" Mara asked, her voice sharp with dread. He pressed his fingers lightly to Lillian's throat, then touched her cheek again. "The fever may be breaking." Mara rose too fast, knocking the chair back. "Maybe." He gave her the smallest tired smile. "I know, there is that word again." She almost laughed. This time it came nearer to joy than grief. They changed the bedding quickly. Caleb opened the window a finger's width to let the sour fever air drift out while keeping the chill away. Mara wiped her mother's face and neck with clean water, whispering thanks under her breath with each careful stroke. By full morning, Lillian's breathing had eased. Not well, not safe, but easier. Dr. Bell arrived before noon and stood at the bedside with one hand on his suspenders, listening, watching, measuring what hope dared to show. At last he nodded. "She has turned a corner." Mara covered her mouth. Caleb looked down at the floor. "Do not mistake me," the doctor said. "She is weak as a winter calf. She will need care, food, and weeks of rest. Fever can be a thief even after it leaves, but unless it comes roaring back, I believe Mrs. Vale means to stay in this world a while longer." Mara sat down hard in the chair. Lillian opened her eyes clearer than they had been in days. She looked at Mara first, then Caleb, then the doctor. "Well," she whispered, "if I am staying, someone had better make tea." For one stunned second, no one moved. Then Mara laughed. It was not loud. It was not whole. It broke halfway through and turned into tears, but it filled the sick room with the first true warmth it had known since the Vales arrived. Caleb turned toward the stove before anyone could see his face too clearly. "I'll put the kettle on," he said. Lillian watched him go, then shifted her sharp, weary eyes to her daughter. "Dear heart," she murmured, "why does that man look as if he has just been spared something too?" Mara's laughter faded. She looked toward the doorway where Caleb had disappeared, carrying his quiet grief with him like a shadow he never named. "I don't know," she said softly. But for the first time since the creek bed, she wanted to. By afternoon, Lillian Vale was awake enough to complain about the tea. That was how Mara knew hope had truly entered the house. "It tastes like boiled fence post," Lillian whispered from the pillows, her voice weak but sharp around the edges. "Did you make it, Mara?" Mara sat beside the bed with both hands wrapped around the cup. "No, Mama." Lillian's eyes moved toward Caleb, who stood near the doorway pretending interest in a loose hinge on the washstand. "Then I shall be grateful instead of honest," Lillian said. Caleb glanced over, and for the first time since the fever had turned, Mara saw amusement touch his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, "on this ranch, gratitude and honesty are both welcome, though not always at the same table." Lillian gave a tired sound that might have become a laugh if she had strength enough. "Then bring honey next time, Mr. Rusk, and we will see if your tea can be redeemed." "Yes, ma'am." He left the room and Mara lowered her head. The relief was so deep it frightened her. For days, she had feared every breath her mother took might be the last. Now Lillian could insult T. It felt like a miracle dressed in plain clothes. Her mother watched her too closely. "You look as if you've been dragged behind a wagon," Lillian said. "I nearly was." "Don't grow clever with a sick woman. We have nothing to do but notice things." Mara smoothed the quilt. "You need rest. And you need sleep, food, and a face that does not look guilty every time that rancher walks past the door." Mara's hand stilled. Lillian's expression softened. "Ah, so there is a story." "No story." "There is always a story when a young woman answers too quickly." "Mama." Lillian shifted against the pillows, wincing from weakness. Mara leaned forward at once, but her mother waved her off with 2 fingers. "I remember pieces," Lillian said. "The wagon, rain, a man carrying me, you crying though you thought I could not hear, a cup at my mouth, his voice telling you not to wring the cloth so hard because water still had work to do." Her eyes narrowed gently. "Then I remember waking and seeing you with the look of a woman who had asked something she could not take back." Mara felt heat rise in her face. Lillian did not smile now. She waited with a patience that had raised a daughter, buried a husband, lost a home, and still survived enough to ask the right question. Mara stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the ranch yard lay bright after rain. Peter led a bay horse toward the trough. Chickens worried the mud near the porch steps. Farther out, Caleb stood by the corral with one boot on the lower rail, speaking to a chestnut mare in a low voice while he checked her foreleg. He moved as if the world could be handled gently and firmly at once. "I asked him to marry me," Mara said. Behind her, the room went quiet. "When?" Lillian asked. "Last night, when your fever was still high." "Because you love him." Mara closed her eyes. "Because I was afraid." Lillian breathed out slowly. "I know," Mara said, turning back. "It was foolish." "No." The answer surprised her. "It was desperate," Lillian said. "There is a difference. Desperate people may act too quickly, but that does not make them fools." Mara's throat tightened. He refused. "Good." "Mama." "Did he shame you?" "No." "Did he make you feel bought?" "No." "Did he offer shelter only if you gave him your name?" "No. He said we could stay whether I married him or not. He said he would not be another man narrowing my choices." Lillian's eyes closed for a moment, and something like peace crossed her worn face. "Then he refused you properly." Mara sank into the chair. It did not feel proper. Rejection seldom does when it first arrives, but some refusals are doors closing, and some are fences keeping you from a cliff. Mara looked down at her hands. Lillian's voice softened. "Fear can point toward truth, but it cannot carry you all the way there. It runs too fast, it leaves half the heart behind." "I do not know what I feel." "Then be grateful, he gave you time to find out." Outside, Caleb lifted the mare's hoof, ran his hand down her leg, then set it gently back into the mud. The horse nudged his shoulder, and he patted her neck without looking to see if anyone noticed. Mara noticed. "I thought I was asking for safety," she whispered. "But when he said no, it hurt in a way safety should not hurt." Lillian studied her. "That is worth remembering." Caleb returned a few minutes later with a fresh cup of tea and a small jar of honey in his other hand. "I have been instructed," he said. Lillian accepted the cup with solemn dignity. A man who learns quickly is less trouble than most. "I will try not to take pride in that." "Pride has ruined better men than you, Mr. Rusk." His eyes flickered with something old, but it was gone before Mara could name it. He set the honey beside the bed and looked toward her. "Peter is riding to town again. I thought he could post a letter if you want to write your cousin." The offer landed gently, but it changed the room. Myra looked at her mother. Lillian said nothing, only watched. "My cousin," Myra repeated. "You said Clearwater Crossing," Caleb said. "Boarding house, if I remember right. I don't know when a reply would come, but the sooner a letter goes, the sooner you'll have one." It was a practical kindness, a decent kindness, and yet it felt like someone had opened a gate she was not sure she wanted to walk through. "Yes," Mara said. "Thank you, I should write." Caleb nodded as if her answer had not cost anything. "Paper is in the desk by the parlor window." That evening, Mara sat at the desk with a pen in her hand and a blank sheet before her. She wrote her cousin's name, then stopped. What could she say? That the road had failed them, that her mother had nearly died, that a stranger had given them a roof, and in that roof Mara had begun to feel something more dangerous than fear because it did not know how to leave. She dipped the pen again. "Dear Mrs. Hensley." Then nothing. In the kitchen, Caleb moved quietly. Lillian slept. The house smelled of honeyed tea and clean sheets drying near the stove. Mara looked around the room that had belonged to no one but Caleb Rusk for years. Already there were signs of them in it. Her mother's shawl over the chair, their trunk beside the wall, the tin cup on the shelf, washed and waiting, a folded cloth near the basin. Small things, temporary things, yet they made the house feel less like shelter and more like a question. Could a place become dear before it became yours? Could a heart start answering before a mind allowed it? Mara touched the pen to the paper, then lifted it again. Outside, Caleb crossed the porch carrying a lantern toward the barn. Its glow moved through the window, warm and steady in the falling dark. Mara watched until the light disappeared. Then she folded the blank letter carefully, as if even silence needed keeping, and slipped it into the drawer without sending it anywhere at all. The day after Lillian's fever broke, Mercy Ridge Ranch changed in small ways no one named aloud. The sickroom window was opened a little longer in the afternoon. The sour heat of illness slowly gave way to the clean smell of soap, broth, and sun-warmed cotton. The basin beside the bed was emptied more often for washing than for fever cloths. Lillian still slept more than she woke, but when her eyes opened, they knew the room, knew her daughter, and followed Caleb Rusk with sharp interest whenever he tried to pass unnoticed. He never managed it. "You walk soft for a man with boots that size," Lillian told him one morning when he brought tea with a spoonful of honey already stirred in. Caleb stopped at the foot of the bed. "I did not mean to wake you." "You did not. I was awake waiting to see whether you would pretend again that you made too much tea by accident." Mara, sitting near the window with a basket of mending in her lap, hid her smile in one of Caleb's work shirts. Caleb gave Lillian the cup. "The kettle does not know how to make a single serving. Neither do kind men who dislike being thanked." He looked toward Mara as if seeking rescue and found none. Lillian sipped the tea, closed her eyes, and nodded. "Better, not good, but better." "I will accept better." "You should. It is more than most men earn." Caleb left with more speed than dignity, and this time Mara did laugh softly. Her mother turned that bright, tired gaze on her. "There, that sound has been gone too long." "I was not aware I had misplaced it." "You misplaced many things on the road west: sleep, appetite, temper, sense." "Mama it." "Do not mama me. I nearly died. I have earned plain speech for at least a month." Mara folded the shirt over her knee. "Only a month. If I recover slower, I may claim two." The humor faded gently between them. Mara looked down at the mending. The shirt in her lap had torn at the elbow. Caleb had given it to her with an apology, saying he could do it himself if she was too tired. But she had needed work that was not watching a breath rise and fall. She had needed to do something with her hands that did not feel like begging heaven. The stitches were not fine, but they were steady. Lillian watched her work. "Did you write to your cousin?" Myra's needle paused. "No." "Did you begin?" "Yes." And I could not find the rest of the words." Lillian nodded, as if that answered more than the question. Words can be stubborn when the heart is divided. "My heart is not divided." "No." Myra pulled the thread through cloth. "I am grateful to Mr. Rusk, that is all." Gratitude does not make a woman look out the window every time a man crosses the yard. Myra looked up too quickly. Lillian's mouth curved. "I am recovering, not blind." Outside, Caleb was near the barn with Peter Dawes, showing him how to set a new hinge on the wagon shed door. He stood close enough to guide the boy's hand but did not take the tool away from him. Peter missed the mark twice. Caleb only tapped the wood, spoke a few words, and let him try again. Myra watched despite herself. "He teaches patiently," she said. "He does many things patiently." The needle slipped and pricked Mara's finger. She drew in a breath. Lillian held out her hand. "Come here." "It is nothing." "I did not ask whether it was fatal. Come here." Mara crossed to the bed. Lillian took her hand and inspected the tiny bead of blood on her fingertip. "When you were 7, Lillian said, you tore your best dress climbing the apple tree behind Mrs. Reynard's house." Mara blinked. "I remember." "You came home certain your father would be angry. Instead, he laughed and told you trees had no respect for Sunday fabric. He bought me a ribbon the next day." "Yes." Lillian's face softened, but her eyes carried a hard-won sadness. "Your father could be tender, Mara. That is part of why his lies hurt so deeply. It would be easier if people were only one thing." Mara looked down. "I have been angry with him," she whispered. "I know. Sometimes more angry than sad." "So have I." The confession startled her. Lillian had defended Warren Vale for months after his death, even while creditors carried chairs from their parlor and counted spoons at the dining table. She had held her grief like a widow was expected to hold it, quiet and loyal, while humiliation stripped their home bare. Lillian's thumb brushed Mara's hand. "I loved your father. I also wish he had trusted me with the truth before the truth became a sheriff at the door. Both can live in the same heart. It is crowded but possible." Mara sat beside her. "Did you marry him from love?" A long silence followed. "At first," Lillian said, "I married him because he seemed like a safe shore. My mother had died the year before. My brothers had scattered. I was tired of feeling like a guest in other people's houses. Your father came with a good coat, a steady smile, and promises spoken as if the world obeyed him." "That sounds like fear." "It was partly fear." Lillian turned her eyes toward the ceiling. "Love came, but it came after. Real love, not the relief I mistook for it. We had good years. We had foolish years. We had lies by the end. That is the trouble with choices made while running. Sometimes they lead to a good place, but you can spend half your life wondering whether you chose it or merely collapsed there." Mara sat very still. Lillian looked back at her. "Do not collapse into Caleb Rusk's life, dear heart." Mara's throat tightened. "I asked once, he refused. And thank heaven for that. It hurt. I expect it did. He said if he took my yes while fear sat at the table, he would be taking more than I offered." Lillian's eyes grew damp. "A man like that is rarer than a blue rose," she said. "But even a rare man must be chosen clear-eyed." Mara looked toward the doorway. From the kitchen came the sound of Caleb setting down wood near the stove. "What if clear-eyed choosing leads to the same answer?" she asked. "Then you will know it is an answer and not an escape." That evening, Caleb came in from the pasture with mud on his boots and a shallow cut across the back of one hand. Mara noticed it while he washed at the basin near the kitchen door. You're bleeding. He glanced down, fence wire. She rose from the table. Sit. It is a scratch. So was my finger this morning, and Mama nearly held a funeral over it. Sit. One corner of his mouth moved, but he obeyed. Mara fetched clean water and a strip of linen. His hand was broad and rough, the knuckles scarred from old work. She cleaned the cut carefully, aware of his silence, aware of her own breath, aware of the strange intimacy of tending a wound that did not truly need tending. You have gentle hands, he said. She did not look up. You sound surprised. No, just noticing. The words warmed her more than they should have. She wrapped the linen around his hand. There. Thank you. You are welcome. Neither moved. The lamp on the kitchen table burned steady between them. 2 cups of coffee sat cooling beside a plate of untouched bread. From the sick room, Lillian gave a small cough, then called out weakly. If you two are finished pretending that bandage required such silence, I would like more tea. Mara snatched her hands back, face burning. Caleb stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Yes, ma'am. Lillian's soft chuckle followed him all the way to the stove. Days passed and Lillian's strength returned by inches. She sat up longer. She ate broth without complaint, then complained loudly enough about broth that Caleb made chicken stew and claimed it was for himself. Mara took over washing, mending, sweeping, and the stubborn kitchen stove that smoked whenever she opened it too fast. She worked not because Caleb demanded it, but because doing fair work let her stand straighter beneath his roof. Little by little, the house changed again. A second towel appeared by the washstand. Mara's sewing basket stayed near the parlor chair. Lillian's shawl found a regular place over the rocker. Caleb began leaving tea leaves where Mara could reach them. Peter started knocking before entering the kitchen, grinning like a boy who understood more than he said. One morning, Caleb found Mara outside the corral before breakfast, watching the horses crop at the hay. That mare there is Juniper, he said, coming to stand a few feet away. She bites men who brag. Only men. She has sound judgment. Mara smiled, and the black one. Preacher. Because he is solemn. Because he kicks on Sundays. Her laugh came easier this time, and Caleb looked at her as if the sound had given him something he had not known he missed. For a while they stood in the pale gold morning without speaking. The land stretched wide around them. The ranch no longer seemed empty to Mara. It seemed waiting. Caleb rested one hand on the fence rail. I found the wagon driver. Mara's smile faded. In town, she asked. Passing through south of here. Peter heard it from a freight man. Driver's name is Silas Cope. Her hands tightened on the rail. Did you speak to him? No. Will you? Caleb looked across the pasture. Not unless there is need. He left you. The town knows it. Men like that lose more by being known than by being struck. Mara studied him. You do not want revenge. No. Not even a little. A shadow crossed his face. Wanting it and feeding it are different things. The answer settled into her. Here was another piece of him, quiet and restrained, a man with anger enough to feel it and honor enough not to worship it. Before she could answer, Lillian appeared on the porch wrapped in her shawl, leaning heavily on the doorframe but standing. Mama, Myra called, hurrying toward her. I am not made of spun sugar, Lillian said, though her knees shook. I wanted to see the morning. Caleb crossed the yard at once and brought a chair from the kitchen. He set it in the sun near the porch rail, then stepped back before Lillian could thank him. Lillian lowered herself into it with Mara's help. Her face was pale, but the sunlight touched her hair and made her look alive in a way that stole Mara's breath. Caleb stood at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand. Lillian looked over the yard, the barn, the horses, the wet garden patch beyond the well. Then she turned to Caleb with a faint smile. "Mr. Rusk," she said, "your ranch is badly in need of flowers." Caleb blinked. "Flowers?" "Yes, a place can be useful and still look like someone hopes to remain in it." Mara looked from her mother to Caleb. Something passed across his face, quick and unguarded. Hope, perhaps, or fear of it. Tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Caleb after his first refusal, or would your heart have been too wounded to ask again? That night, long after Lillian had been helped back to bed, Mara stepped onto the porch and found Caleb standing there alone. The sky was clear at last, crowded with stars. The rain had left the earth smelling clean. "I never thanked you properly," she said. He did not turn right away. "For what?" "For refusing me kindly." He looked at her then. The porch boards creaked beneath her small step forward. "I was angry at first, ashamed too, but today my mother said fear can point toward truth without being able to carry a person all the way there. She sounds wise. She is unbearable when wise." Caleb's mouth softened. Mara looked out over the dark yard. "I do not know yet what my whole truth is, but I know this much. I feel safer because you said no than I might have felt if you had said yes." Caleb's hand tightened around the porch rail. "That may be the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me," he replied. For a long moment they stood beneath the stars, not touching, not promising, not hurrying the future. Then from inside the house, Lillian called, "If either of you catches cold being poetic on that porch, I refuse to nurse you." Mara laughed into the night, and Caleb bowed his head with a quiet smile. But when Mara went back inside, Caleb stayed on the porch alone, looking toward the dark pasture. His smile faded. One hand moved to his chest, where an old grief seemed to live beneath the bone. He had saved Lillian Vale from a fever. He had saved Mara from a frightened vow. What he did not yet know was whether he had saved his own heart, or finally placed it where it could be broken. The next morning, Mara found the blank letter exactly where she had left it, folded inside Caleb's desk, as if it were something finished instead of something she had failed to begin. She opened the drawer while the house still held the blue quiet before sunrise. Lillian slept in the sick room, one hand resting above the quilt, her breathing thin but even. Caleb had gone out before first light, leaving coffee warm on the stove and a note written in a plain, careful hand. "Gone to mend the north fence. Peter will stay close to the house if needed. Tea is in the tin by the flower." Mara stood with the note in her hand, longer than necessary. There was no affection in the words, no sweetness, no claim, yet she could feel Caleb's care tucked between each practical line. He had told her where the tea was because he knew Lillian would ask for it. He had left Peter near the house so Mara would not feel alone. He had gone to mend a fence because ranches did not stop needing work simply because hearts had grown complicated inside them. She folded the note and placed it beside the blank letter. Then she made tea. It was not much better than Caleb's, though she would never admit that to Lillian. Her mother woke as Mara stirred honey into the cup. "If that is Mr. Rusk's tea, tell him I have forgiven worse things in my life. It is mine. Then I shall praise it with a mother's dishonesty." Mara carried the cup over. "You are in good spirits." "I am alive. It makes a person generous." Mara helped her sit higher against the pillows. Lillian's strength remained poor, but her eyes were clearer each day. The fever had left hollows beneath her cheekbones and silver threads of damp hair at her temples. Still, there was a stubborn light in her that illness had not managed to take. Lillian drank and made a thoughtful face. "Well," Mara asked. "It is warm. That is all." "My dear, sometimes warmth is enough." Mara laughed softly and sat beside her with the mending basket. For an hour the house rested in simple sounds, needle through cloth, spoon against cup, The stove settling, chickens fussing beyond the porch. It should have felt temporary, but it did not. Mara had begun to know where things belonged. The flour tin, the clean cloths, the cracked blue plate Caleb used for biscuits, the shelf where he kept coffee, the peg where his coat hung when rain came. A stranger's house had started to teach her its habits. Near mid-morning, Peter knocked at the kitchen door before opening it, just as he had begun doing since Mara and Lillian arrived. "Miss Vale," he said, cheeks pink from the cold air, "Mr. Rusk told me to ask if you needed anything before I ride out to the lower pasture." Mara glanced toward the sick room. "We are well enough, thank you." Peter nodded, but his gaze moved to the stove. "That coffee fresh?" Mara smiled. "Fresh enough." He stepped inside and poured a cup, then lingered by the table with the restless look of a boy carrying news too large for his mouth. "What is it?" Mara asked. Peter shifted. "Nothing proper." "Then why do you look as if it is sitting on your boot?" He grinned despite himself, then sobered. "Mrs. Tabor and Mrs. Pike were talking again in town yesterday." Mara's smile faded. Peter saw it and rushed on. "Not just against you, against Mr. Rusk too, saying his house has turned into a charity station and that some women know how to fall lucky." The words went through Mara like a cold pin. From the sick room, Lillian's voice came weak but sharp. "Young man, step where I can see you." Peter nearly dropped his coffee. Mara tried to rise, but Lillian called again. "Do not protect me from foolishness. I have met plenty." Peter stepped into the sick room doorway, twisting his hat. Lillian looked him over from the pillows. "Did these women say anything useful?" "No, ma'am." "Then why did you carry it here?" Peter flushed deep red. "I thought Miss Vale should know." "Why?" "So she would be ready if town folk said it to her face." Lillian considered him. "That is almost thoughtful." Peter looked as if he did not know whether he had been praised or sentenced. "But hear me," Lillian continued. "A woman cannot spend her whole life ready for every unkind tongue. She would have no time left to live. Next time, bring news only if it helps us act. If it only helps us hurt, leave it in the road where you found it." Peter swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "And bring wood before you ride out. Useful news comes in armfuls." "Yes, ma'am." He escaped to the woodpile with visible relief. Mara stood very still. Lillian turned her gaze to her daughter. "Do not let those women make you ashamed of being kept alive." Mara looked down. "They are not entirely wrong. They are entirely rude. I did fall lucky." "No," Lillian said. "We met Mercy. Luck is a coin tossed in the dirt. Mercy has a conscience." Mara looked toward the window, toward the long rise beyond the barn where Caleb had disappeared before dawn. "What if the whole town thinks I am trying to catch him?" she asked. "Are you?" Mara's face warmed. "No." "Then let the town be wrong. It will survive the disappointment." By noon, Lillian insisted on sitting on the porch again. Mara wrapped her in the faded shawl and helped her to the chair Caleb had begun leaving near the sunniest corner, though he still never said it had been placed there for her. The air was cool but bright. The rain-washed earth smelled clean, and far beyond the corral, the open land rolled gold and green beneath a wide sky. Lillian closed her eyes and lifted her face to the light. "I had forgotten," she whispered. "What?" "How kind the sun feels when you thought you might not see it again." Mara tucked the shawl around her. "Do you want to go back inside?" "No, I want to sit here and be troublesome to death by enjoying myself." Mara sat on the porch step below her. For a time, neither spoke. Then Lillian said, "You should go to town." Mara turned. "Town?" "We need thread, soap, and perhaps something better than Mr. Rusk's coffee if such a miracle exists." "Mama, I do not think town is wise." Because two women there have tongues without employment. Because people are talking. People will talk whether you stand before them or hide from them. Hiding only saves them the trouble of lowering their voices. Myra looked toward the road. I am not ready. No one ever is. That is why the first step is so often ugly. Caleb returned earlier than expected, riding in with dust on his coat and a strip of dark mud along one sleeve. He slowed when he saw Lillian on the porch and tipped his hat. Mrs. Vale. Mr. Rusk, your ranch requires soap, thread, and coffee fit for Christian use. My daughter will need a ride to town. Myra rose quickly. Mama. Caleb looked between them, reading more than was said. I can send Peter. I am sure you can, Lillian said. But Mara has legs, pride, and a need to remember both. Caleb's eyes moved to Mara. Do you want to go? It was such a Caleb question. Not will you go, not you should go, not don't mind them. He placed the choice back into her hands as if it belonged there. Mara drew a breath. Yes. The ride into Briar Springs took less than half an hour by wagon. Caleb drove, and Mara sat beside him with her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. The town appeared slowly beyond a bend in the road. A mercantile, a livery, a church with a small bell, a doctor's office, and a row of houses that looked as if they had been placed close together for courage. People looked when Caleb's wagon rolled in. Mara felt every glance. At the mercantile, Caleb tied the team and came around to help her down. She almost refused his hand out of pride, then accepted it out of honesty. His palm was warm and steady. Inside, shelves crowded with canned peaches, bolts of cloth, coffee tins, lamp oil, and penny candy. A woman behind the counter looked up. She was narrow-faced, with iron-gray hair and a mouth arranged for judgment. Mara knew without being told that this was Mrs. Pike. Mrs. Tabor stood near the fabric bolts with a basket on her arm. The air changed when Mara entered. Caleb felt it too. She could tell by the slight stillness in his shoulders. "Mornin', Mrs. Pike," he said. "Mr. Rusk," her eyes moved to Mara, "and Miss Vale, I believe." Mara lifted her chin. "Good morning." Mrs. Tabor stepped closer. "How is your poor mother?" The poor carried too much sweetness. "She is recovering," Mara said. "Thank you." "How fortunate Mr. Rusk found you when he did," Mrs. Tabor said. "Yes," Mara replied, "it was fortunate." Mrs. Pike folded her hands. "And will you be continuing on to your people soon?" The store went very quiet. Mara felt Caleb shift beside her, but he did not answer for her. That steadied her. "My mother is not strong enough to travel," Mara said. "Until she is, we are staying where she can heal." Mrs. Pike's eyebrows rose, a delicate arrangement. Caleb's voice came low, "A decent one." Mara looked at him, then back at the women. She had spent months being ashamed of debts she had not made, ruin she had not caused, fear she had not invited. She was tired of carrying other people's ugliness as if it belonged to her. "It is decent," Mara said. "Mr. Rusk opened his home to an ill woman and her daughter after a wagon accident. He asked nothing in return. If that gives this town a story, I hope it has the courage to tell it truthfully." Mrs. Tabor looked down into her basket. Mrs. Pike's mouth tightened. No offense was meant. Mara thought of Lillian on the porch, pale in the sun and still capable of slicing foolishness clean in two. "Then none need be defended," Mara said. Caleb made a sound beside her that might have been a cough, or might have been pride hiding badly. They bought soap, thread, coffee, tea, and a small packet of flower seeds Mara had not meant to pick up. They were marigolds, bright orange in the picture pasted to the packet. She saw them near the porch rail before she allowed herself to think why. On the wagon ride home, Caleb said nothing for a long while. At last he glanced at the seed packet in her hand. "Flowers." Mama said your ranch needs them. She did. I thought marigolds might survive your soil. My soil has been insulted twice in 2 days. Perhaps it will improve from the attention. A smile touched his mouth. Perhaps. The road stretched open before them, sun falling over the wet fields. Mara held the seeds in her lap and felt something quiet settle inside her. Not certainty yet, not a vow, but a root, small and living, pushing down into ground she had not expected to claim. When they reached Mercy Ridge, Lillian was waiting on the porch, wrapped in her shawl like a queen receiving news from war. "Well," she called. Mara held up the packet. "Flowers." Lillian smiled. "Then we may yet make a home of this place." Caleb went still beside the wagon. Mara heard it too, the word her mother had used so easily. Home. It hung in the golden afternoon between all three of them, tender and dangerous as a promise no one had made. And for the first time, Caleb Rusk looked afraid. Caleb Rusk had faced storms that tore roofs from sheds. He had faced cattle stampedes, winter hunger, bad debts, broken bones, and nights so cold the water bucket froze solid beside the stove. But Lillian Vale saying the word home on his porch unsettled him more than any of those. He carried the flour sack into the kitchen and set it down too hard. A puff of white dust rose from the top. Mara noticed but said nothing. Lillian noticed and smiled into her shawl as if she had seen a gate swing open all by itself. "Careful, Mr. Rusk," she said from the porch chair. "That flour did not insult you." Caleb cleared his throat. "No, ma'am." Mara brought in the packet of marigold seeds and placed it on the table. The small envelope looked bright and foolish against the scratched wood, like a promise that had wandered into the wrong house. Caleb looked at it once, then away. "You do not have to let us plant them," Mara said quietly. He turned toward her. "I never said that. You looked as if the flowers had asked for your hand in marriage." Lillian coughed into her shawl, though the sound held laughter. Caleb's ears reddened slightly. "Flowers are fine." "Fine," Mara repeated. "Yes. For a man whose ranch has been flowerless for years, you accept defeat with grace." "I have been outnumbered." Mara smiled, but something in his face kept her from teasing further. Beneath his quiet humor sat a strain she had seen only in glimpses. It came whenever the house felt too warm, whenever Lillian spoke of staying, whenever Mara laughed as though she belonged there. It was not dislike. It was not regret. It was fear. Not the fear that had driven Mara to propose too soon. His fear was older, quieter, trained not to show itself except in the tightening of a hand or the sudden turning away of his eyes. That afternoon, Mara planted the marigolds beside the porch. The soil was stubborn, packed hard from years of being walked past rather than tended. Caleb brought a small hand spade without being asked and set it beside her. Then he lingered near the steps as if he meant to help but did not know whether help would make the moment too intimate. Mara knelt and worked the earth loose. "You do not have to stand guard over flower seeds," she said. "Rabbits have poor morals. I will take my chances." He stood a little longer anyway. Lillian watched from her chair, wrapped in sunlight and satisfaction. "Mr. Rusk, either help the girl or admit you enjoy watching her improve your land." Caleb lowered his head, defeated, and stepped off the porch. Mara handed him the spade. Their hands brushed. It was nothing, a small touch, a passing warmth, yet both went still a moment too long. Caleb took the spade and crouched beside her, turning the soil with careful motions. He worked close enough that Mara could see the faint scar along his thumb, the dust on his sleeve, the way his lashes lowered when he gave attention to a task. He did not speak. Neither did she. The silence between them had changed from empty to full. Together, they made a narrow bed near the porch rail. Mara pressed the seeds into the earth one by one. My mother had marigolds in Ohio. Did she? Along the front walk, she said they were cheerful without being vain. That sounds like Mrs. Vale. She used to cut a few and put them in a blue jar by the kitchen window. My father said he could tell whether she was angry by how hard she set the jar down. Caleb's mouth softened. Was she angry often? Only when he deserved it. That often then. Myra laughed, then felt the laugh catch on old sorrow. More often than I knew. Caleb's hand paused in the soil. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. For what? For the way memory can turn on a person. The words were plain, but they carried knowledge. Mara studied him. Yours has done that. Caleb looked toward the pasture. For a second she thought he might answer fully. Instead, he brushed soil from his hands and stood. Sometimes, he said. Then he picked up the empty seed packet and carried it to the porch table. Myra watched him go. Behind her, Lillian's voice came softly. That man keeps a locked room inside himself. Myra stayed kneeling beside the new garden bed. I know. Do not try to break the door down. I would not. No, you would stand outside it with tea until he opened it from shame. Myra turned scandalized. Mama. I have been ill, not gentle. By the end of the week, Lillian could walk from the sick room to the porch with Mara on one side and her cane on the other. Caleb had made the cane from a polished length of ashwood, though he claimed it was only a spare piece he had shaped because his hands needed work after supper. Lillian accepted the lie with dignity and named the cane Abigail. Why Abigail? Peter asked. Because it sounds like a woman who will not let me fall in public. Peter nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am. The ranch began to gather a rhythm around her recovery. Mara rose before sunrise to start coffee. Caleb came in from the barn with cold air clinging to his coat. Lillian joined them when she could, sitting at the kitchen table with a quilt around her shoulders, issuing advice on everything from oatmeal to weather signs. Peter ate quickly and fled before Lillian could inspect his manners too closely. In exchange for board, Mara took over the washing, bread making, and mending. Caleb objected only once. You do not have to earn every hour here, he said while she scrubbed shirts in a tub behind the house. She pushed wet hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. I know. Then why do you work like someone will throw you out if you stop? The question landed too close. Mara wrung a shirt slowly. Because I spent months watching men measure the value of every chair, spoon, quilt, and plate in my mother's house. After that, a woman likes to know exactly what she contributes. Caleb crouched beside the tub and picked up another shirt, though it was clear he had no practice helping at wash. You contribute more than work. Her hand stilled. He looked at the shirt as if it required great thought. The house has been quieter than was good for it. Myra's throat warmed. Houses do not mind quiet. Some do. He began scrubbing the shirt badly. Mara watched him for a moment, then took pity. Mr. Rusk, if that is how you wash, I understand why your collars surrendered years ago. He looked at his hands in the water. I am willing to be instructed. I thought ranchers knew everything. Only in town stories. She moved closer to show him how to rub the fabric against the washboard. He listened with grave attention, as if washing a shirt were no less worthy than mending a fence. That was what undid her most. Caleb gave his full respect to whatever stood before him, whether it was a sick woman, a frightened daughter, a nervous horse, or a basin of dirty clothes. A man like that did not make love feel like a trap. He made it feel like ground. On Sunday, Lillian insisted on attending church. Mara argued. Caleb argued less directly but placed the wagon close to the porch, patted the seat with folded quilts, and drove slow enough that a turtle might have passed them with pride. Briar Springs Church was small, whitewashed, and plain. Its bell had a crack in it that made the ringing sound a little sorrowful. Every head turned when Caleb helped Lillian down from the wagon. Mara felt the old heat of gossip at once, but this time her spine stayed straight. Mrs. Pike sat in the second pew. Mrs. Tabor sat beside her. Caleb did not lead Mara and Lillian to the back, where strangers and scandals were expected to make themselves small. He walked them to his family pew near the front. The pew had been empty for years except for Caleb. Mara knew that from the way people looked. Caleb stood aside while Lillian settled, then Mara. Only then did he sit at the aisle end, hat resting on his knee, shoulders square, expression calm. It was a simple act, no speech, no challenge. Yet it said clearly that the women beside him were not shame hidden under his roof. They were guests he honored in public. Mara looked down at her hands until her eyes stopped burning. The hymns began. Lillian's voice was thin but steady. Mara joined after the first verse. Caleb did not sing much, but he held the hymnal where both women could see it. Halfway through the second song, Mara noticed his thumb resting near the edge of the page, not touching her hand but close enough to warm the air between them. After service, Reverend Albright greeted Lillian with honest kindness. Dr. Bell asked after her strength. Several women offered broth recipes she did not ask for. Mrs. Tabor came near with nervous eyes and said, "It is good to see you improved, Mrs. Vale." Lillian smiled. Improvement is more pleasant than the alternative. Mrs. Tabor looked at Mara. "And you, Miss Vale, you look rested." Mara heard the apology beneath the plain words. It was not enough to erase everything, but it was something. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Pike did not come over. Caleb saw Mara notice. "Some folks need longer roads to reach decency," he said as they stepped outside. Mara glanced up at him, "And some never arrive." "Then we need not wait supper on them." She laughed softly, and his eyes warmed. That afternoon, after Lillian had been settled in her porch chair for a nap, Mara found Caleb in the barn oiling harness. Dust floated in the shafts of light that slipped through the boards. The air smelled of hay, leather, and sun-warmed wood. "I wanted to thank you," she said. He did not look up. "For church. For not hiding us." His hand stopped. Mara stepped farther inside. "You could have let us sit in the back. It would have been easier." "For whom?" "For you." He turned the harness strap over slowly. "I have done many things because they were easier. Few of them made me proud." The quiet in the barn deepened. Mara touched the edge of a stall door. "Did people talk when your family pew went empty?" Caleb's face changed. She knew at once she had found the locked door. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "That was too forward." "No," he set the harness down. "It is a fair question." But he did not answer it. Instead, he looked toward the far wall where an old bridle hung apart from the others, dark with age but carefully kept. Beneath it sat a small wooden box on a shelf. Mara had seen him dust around that box twice without touching it. "My mother sat in that pew," he said at last. "Then my father, then just me." Mara waited. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I was 14 when she took fever, 17 when he died under a spooked horse. After that, folks looked at me like a boy wearing a dead man's coat." Mara's heart pulled tight. "I am sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. It was a long time ago. But his voice said it was not. A horse shifted in the next stall. Dust moved through sunlight. Mara wanted to cross the barn and take his hand as she had when binding his cut, but something in his stillness asked her not to. So she stayed where she was. "My mother once told me," she said, "that grief does not leave a house. It only changes rooms." Caleb looked at her then. "And sometimes," Mara continued softly. "It needs someone else to light a lamp in the hallway." His eyes held hers with such quiet feeling that she could not move. Then Lillian called from the porch, "Mara, if you are in the barn getting sentimental, bring my shawl. Sentiment does nothing against a breeze." The moment broke, but not completely. Caleb looked down, and this time his smile trembled at the edge. "Your mother has a gift for ruining tender moments, for saving them from becoming too tender to survive." Mara smiled, but her heart was beating hard. She fetched the shawl from the house and carried it to Lillian. When she returned to the porch, she looked back toward the barn. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching the pasture, one hand resting against the frame. The locked room inside him had opened only a crack. But Mara had seen enough to know what lived there. Not coldness. Not emptiness. A boy beside a sickbed. A man still keeping watch. After that Sunday, Briar Springs began to look at Mercy Ridge Ranch differently. Not all at once. Towns rarely changed their minds with any grace. They shifted like old doors, creaking on rusty hinges, opening only when pushed by patience, shame, or curiosity. But the sight of Caleb Rusk walking two stranded women to his family pew had done what no explanation could have done. It had made gossip stand in daylight. By Monday afternoon, Mrs. Tabor sent a jar of peach preserves with Peter and claimed she had made too many. By Tuesday, Reverend Albright stopped by with a basket of potatoes and a prayer that Lillian accepted because it came with food. By Wednesday, Dr. Bell's sister brought broth and stayed long enough to inspect Caleb's kitchen with quiet horror. "You have lived on coffee, beans, and pride," she told him. Caleb looked toward Mara. "Is pride not nourishing?" "Only to men too stubborn to know they are starving," Lillian said from her chair. Mara laughed, and the sound moved through the kitchen as if it belonged there now. Caleb heard it from the doorway and paused with his hat in his hand. It struck him, not for the first time, how quickly a house could learn new music. A month ago, his evenings had been boots on floorboards, stove wood settling, wind against the eaves, and his own spoon against a tin plate. Now there was Lillian's cane tapping near the porch, Mara humming while she folded sheets, Peter being corrected for eating too fast, and sometimes laughter arriving so suddenly that Caleb forgot to brace against it. That was what frightened him. Loss had taught him that anything warm enough to light a room was warm enough to leave a room cold when it went. He had not meant to grow used to them. He had not meant to know that Lillian liked honey and tea, but not enough to make it sweet as candy. He had not meant to learn that Mara pressed her lips together when measuring flour, or that she talked softly to Juniper though the mare pretended indifference, or that she saved the last biscuit for whoever had worked hardest and never admitted how she chose. Most of all, he had not meant to wonder whether she would still write that letter to Idaho. The blank paper remained in his desk. He knew because he had seen it one evening while looking for the ranch accounts. He had closed the drawer at once, as if he had glimpsed something private, but the knowledge stayed with him. She had not sent for another life. Not yet. One late afternoon, Caleb found Mara near the creek bed where he had first discovered the broken wagon. She had walked there with a basket over her arm to gather what small things had been missed in the first hurried retrieval. He had followed when Peter mentioned where she had gone, though Caleb told himself he only meant to make sure she did not meet trouble on the road. The wreck had been dragged aside, but scars remained, deep ruts in the bank, splintered wood half buried in sand, a strip of torn canvas caught in a mesquite bush, moving lightly in the wind. Mara stood at the bottom of the creek bed, holding something in both hands. Caleb stopped at the ridge. "Miss Vale." She turned. "I found this." He climbed down slowly. In her palms lay the tin cup from the wagon, dented on one side, its handle bent but still whole. "I thought it was lost," she said. Caleb looked at it and remembered her kneeling in the dust, holding that same cup as if water alone could keep her mother tied to life. "Do you want to keep it?" he asked. "I do not know why I would." But her fingers closed around it. Some objects carried sorrow, some carried survival. This one seemed to carry both. Mara brushed dirt from the rim with her thumb. "I hated this place." "I would not blame you. When I was down here, I thought the world had narrowed to this creek bed. Mama burning in my arms, the driver gone, no roof, no money, no road left that made sense." She looked up at the bank. "Then you appeared there." Caleb shifted, uncomfortable beneath the weight of her gaze. "I happened to be riding fence." "No," she said softly. "You happened to be the kind of man who stopped." The wind moved through the dry grass above them. Caleb looked away. Most men would have stopped. Mara gave him a sad smile. "You keep hoping decency is common, so yours will not have to be named." He had no answer for that. She stepped past him and walked toward the broken wheel still lying near the bank. "I have been trying to decide whether my first question to you was only fear. I know it came too soon. I know it was unfair to both of us. But when I stand here, where fear began, I understand something." Caleb's heart beat once hard. "What?" Mara turned with the tin cup held against her waist. "Fear made me reach for safety. But safety alone does not make me watch the barn door when you are late. It does not make your mother's old pew feel sacred to me because you let us sit there. It does not make me want to plant flowers by your porch and see whether they bloom." His face tightened with feeling he did not know how to carry. "Mara," he said, "I am not asking again today." The words relieved and wounded him at the same time. She saw both. "I am telling you I am learning the difference." A long silence passed between them. Then Caleb nodded, "So am I." They walked back to Mercy Ridge as sunset turned the fields copper. Mara carried the tin cup in her basket. Caleb walked beside her, close enough to help if the ground turned uneven, far enough not to assume the right. At the porch, Lillian looked up from her chair. "You found something." Mara held out the cup. Lillian's face changed. She took it with both hands, her thumbs resting over the dents. "Well," she whispered, "there you are, old witness." Caleb looked at her. "Old witness." "That cup saw my daughter frightened enough to bargain with her future," Lillian said. "It saw you refuse to take advantage. That makes it wiser than half the people in Briar Springs." Mara's cheeks warmed, but she did not look away. "If you believe real love should wait until the heart is sure, stay with this story. The next choice Mara makes will not come from panic, and Caleb may have to face the one grief he has spent years keeping quiet." That night, Caleb sat alone in the barn, long after the others slept. The small wooden box beneath his mother's old bridle rested on his knees. He had not opened it in years. His hands stayed on the lid, rough thumbs against smooth wood, while lantern light moved across the walls. Inside were three things: his mother's handkerchief, his father's pocket knife, and a letter Caleb had written at 14, but never sent because there had been no one to send it to. "Mama, I am sorry I could not save you." He did not need to unfold it to know the words. For 19 years, he had mistaken that sentence for a truth. But since Mara and Lillian came, another truth had begun pressing against it, painful and stubborn. A boy could not stop death by holding a cup. A man could still choose not to turn away. Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them, Mara stood in the barn doorway, wrapped in her shawl, her face soft with concern. "I saw the lantern," she said. "I thought something was wrong." Caleb looked down at the box. "Something was," he answered. His voice was rough but steady. "Maybe it has been wrong a long time." Mara did not step farther into the barn. The lantern between her and Caleb threw a warm circle over the dirt floor, the wooden box, and his hands resting on the lid. Outside, night gathered thick around Mercy Ridge Ranch. The house windows glowed across the yard, soft and yellow, and from that distance the ranch looked almost peaceful, a place where no one had ever lost anything, a place where sorrow had never learned the shape of the rooms. But Mara knew better now. She stood in the doorway with her shawl gathered close. "May I come in?" Caleb looked at the box for a moment before answering, "Yes." She entered slowly, careful not to startle the quiet. The horses shifted in their stalls, breathing deep and warm. Dust floated in the lantern light. Somewhere in the rafters, a swallow stirred and settled again. Mara stopped a few feet from him. "You said something has been wrong a long time." Caleb gave a rough breath. "I should not have said it that way." "Why not?" "Because once a thing is said, it asks to be answered." "Yes," she said, "it does." He looked up then, and the grief in his face was so open that she forgot whatever careful words she had planned. For weeks, Caleb Rusk had been steady. He had carried Lillian from the creek bed. He had stood beside Fever without flinching. He had faced gossip with his shoulders square. He had refused Mara with kindness when a lesser man might have taken her fear and called it fate. Yet now, with an old wooden box on his knees, he looked less like the man who had saved them, and more like someone still waiting to be saved from a room in his own memory. "My mother's name was Ruth," he said. Mara sat on an overturned feed bucket nearby, leaving space between them. "That is a gentle name." She was a gentle woman until someone mistook gentleness for weakness. Then she could skin a man with a look. His mouth moved faintly, but the smile did not last. She kept marigolds too. Mara's heart tightened. "By the kitchen steps," he continued. "Not many, just enough to make the place look like she expected spring to keep its promises. My father said flowers were foolish on a working ranch. She told him a man who could not spare a patch of dirt for beauty had grown poorer than he knew." "That sounds like something Mama would say." "They would have liked each other." The words hung there, tender and impossible. Caleb opened the box. Mara did not lean forward. She let him choose what to show. He lifted a folded handkerchief first. It was yellowed with age, the corner stitched with a small R, then a pocket knife with a worn bone handle. Last, a folded paper so soft along the creases it seemed close to falling apart. "I wrote this the night after she died," he said. Mara's voice lowered. "What does it say?" His thumb moved over the paper. "It says I was sorry." "For what?" "For not saving her." The barn seemed to go still around them. Mara's eyes stung. "Caleb, you were 14. I know that in my head. But not in the place where it hurts." He looked at her then, startled by how exactly she had named it. "No," he said, "not there." She drew her shawl tighter, not from cold but from the ache of listening. "Will you tell me?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set the handkerchief back in the box and looked toward the dark rafters. "She took fever in late winter. Not a hard winter by Wyoming standards, but mean enough. Roads half mud, half ice. My father was in the east pasture when she worsened. I remember because she kept asking whether he had come in, and I kept telling her soon. I said it so many times I began to hate the word." Mara folded her hands in her lap. "I tried to cool her, tried to make her drink. I changed cloths until my fingers wrinkled. I prayed until the prayers sounded like begging and the begging sounded like anger." His voice roughened. "She kept looking at the door, not at me, at the door, waiting for my father, waiting for help, waiting for someone grown." Mara whispered, "You were there." "I was a boy." "You were her son." He closed his eyes. The horses breathed. The lantern flame bent slightly in a draft. "When she died," Caleb said, "I was holding a cup of water. She could not swallow by then, but I kept trying. I thought if I could get her to take one more sip she might stay, a foolish thing." No, it was. It was love. His jaw tightened. Myra leaned forward slightly. Love often looks foolish when it has no power left. That does not make it small. Caleb stared at the paper in his hands. My father came in after dark, too late for the doctor, too late for her, too late for anything but standing at the foot of the bed with mud on his boots and her name in his mouth. He swallowed. He never blamed me. That may have been worse. Worse. If he had blamed me, I could have argued. Hated him, maybe. Instead, he just went quiet. 3 years later, a horse threw him against a post, and then there was no one left who remembered the house before it turned hollow. Myra wiped at one tear before it could fall. Caleb looked ashamed of having caused it. I did not mean to sadden you. You did not cause sadness by telling the truth. You only let me see where it was. That undid something in him. His hand closed around the folded letter. When I found your mother in that creek bed, I heard Ruth Rusk breathing again. Same fight in the chest, same fever heat, same helpless hour asking a man what he was made of. He looked at Mara fully now. I carried her here because I could not carry my mother anywhere. I made tea because no one had made any for her. I sat by that bed because a boy once sat alone and thought being alone was part of why death won. Mara rose, but she did not touch him yet. Death did not win because you were alone. I know. But not there. He gave a broken nod. Not there. So Mara did the only thing that felt honest. She crossed the space between them and sat beside him on the wooden bench. Not too close. Close enough that he did not have to be alone with the box. My mother lived, she said softly, but not because you owed the past a debt. She lived because you gave mercy to the present. Caleb looked down. And if she had not lived, your mercy would still have mattered. His eyes closed again, and this time when he breathed, it seemed to come from a place that had been locked tight for 19 years. I was afraid, he said. Mara waited. When you asked me to marry you that night, part of me wanted to say yes so badly it near stole my breath. Her heart gave a hard, quiet beat. He opened his eyes but did not look at her. Not because I knew love yet, not proper, not whole, but because the house had stopped being empty with you in it, because your mother made noise even while half dead, because you looked at me as if I might be good and I had spent a long time not asking whether I was. He shook his head. And that wanting scared me. It would have been easy to dress it up as protection. To say yes and tell myself I was saving you. But you did not. No. Why? He turned to her then. Because you deserved better than a man using your fear to quiet his loneliness. Mara's tears came silently. Caleb looked stricken. Mara. She shook her head. Do not apologize for being honorable. I am only tired of finding new reasons to care for you. His face changed. The confession had slipped out soft, but it filled the barn like dawn entering a closed room. Mara looked down at her hands. I did not mean to say that. I am glad you did. She looked back at him. The lantern light held them in a fragile circle. He did not reach for her. She did not reach for him. Yet something had changed more deeply than touch could have changed it. Caleb folded the old letter and placed it back in the box. What will you do with it? Mara asked. I do not know. Perhaps keep it. I have kept it 19 years. No, she said gently. You have punished yourself with it 19 years. Keeping can be different. He studied her with quiet wonder, as if she had opened a window in a wall. From the house, Lillian's voice carried faintly through the night. Mara, if you have fallen asleep in that barn, kindly choose a place without mice. Mara laughed through tears. Caleb lowered his head, and his own breath came almost like a laugh, though it was rougher. I should walk you back, he said. They rose together. Caleb closed the wooden box and returned it to the shelf beneath the old bridle. This time, his hand rested on the lid only briefly before letting go. As they crossed the yard, the stars shone clean above them. The marigold bed lay dark beside the porch, seeds hidden under soil, waiting for roots no eye could see yet. Mara walked with Caleb close beside her, their shoulders not touching, their silence no longer uncertain. At the porch steps she paused. "Caleb." He turned at the sound of his given name on her lips. She had used it rarely. Tonight it seemed to reach him before the rest of her words did. "I am not afraid tonight." His eyes searched hers. She continued, voice steady. "Not of being alone, not of town talk, not of Idaho, not even of leaving if leaving turns out to be right. I wanted you to know that." The words settled over him slowly. "Is leaving right?" he asked. "I do not think so." His breath caught almost too softly to hear. "But I am still thinking clearly," she said, "as you asked me to." Caleb nodded, though the movement cost him. "That is all I ever wanted for you," he said. Myra held his gaze. "No, it is not all." For once he did not deny it. Inside the house, Lillian called again. "If the two of you are standing on the porch looking tragic, come inside before I recover enough to scold properly." Myra smiled and opened the door. Warmth spilled out. Lamplight tea, the smell of clean linen, her mother waiting with sharp eyes and a soft heart. Behind her, Caleb stepped into the house as if crossing into a life that had been offered to him quietly, not as a bargain, not as a rescue, but as a choice still unfolding. And on the shelf in the barn, beneath his mother's old bridle, the letter of apology lay closed at last. For the next 2 days, Mara did not speak of the wooden box in the barn. Neither did Caleb. That silence was not the empty kind. It was careful, like a clean cloth laid over a wound after it had finally been washed. Something had been opened between them beneath the lantern light, something too honest to be hurried. Caleb moved through the ranch with his usual steadiness, but Mara saw the change in him. He no longer looked toward the barn shelf as if it accused him. He no longer grew quite so stiff when Lillian mentioned spring planting or curtains or the proper place for a row of beans. He was still afraid of hope, but now he seemed less ashamed of wanting it. Mara kept busy because stillness made her heart speak too loudly. She scrubbed the kitchen table until the old knife marks showed pale. She patched Peter's torn sleeve. She helped Lillian walk from the porch to the garden bed and back again, a journey of 20 steps that left her mother proud, breathless, and annoyed at being praised for it. "I crossed half the country in a wagon," Lillian said, leaning on Abigail the cane. "Do not clap because I reached a marigold bed." Myra smiled. "No one clapped. You considered it." I admired quietly. "That is clapping with manners." The marigolds had not yet broken through the soil, but Lillian inspected the dirt each morning as if she expected obedience from seeds. Caleb had built a low border from smooth stones gathered near the creek. He claimed it was to keep chickens out. Mara did not point out that chickens could step over stones if they chose. Lillian did, of course. "Those rocks are sentiment, Mr. Rusk," she told him. "They are rocks, Mrs. Vale. Many sentimental things are." Caleb looked at Mara, helpless against both women, and Mara felt joy rise so suddenly she had to turn away. It frightened her less now. On the 3rd morning after Caleb's confession, a letter arrived. Peter brought it from town tucked into his vest, along with a parcel of coffee and a small sack of sugar. "Post came through early," he said. "Letter for Miss Vale, from Idaho looks like." Mara was kneading bread dough when he handed it to her. Flour dusted her wrists. The envelope bore her cousin's name in the corner. Mrs. Ada Hensley, Clearwater Crossing, Idaho Territory. For a long moment, the kitchen held still. Lillian sat at the table, her shawl around her shoulders, one hand resting on her teacup. Caleb stood near the stove, suddenly very interested in the fire, though there was no need to stir it. Peter looked between them, realized he had delivered more than paper, and retreated toward the barn with uncommon wisdom. Mara stared at the letter. "I never sent mine," she said. Lillian's eyes softened. Then she must have written before knowing what happened. Mara broke the seal with careful fingers. The letter was brief. Ada Hensley had heard from a freight company that the Vale's hired driver had arrived without them, claiming sickness had delayed the women near Briar Springs. Ada had been alarmed. She wrote that the boarding house room was still available, that work could be found, and that if Mara and Lillian could reach Clearwater Crossing by autumn, they would have a place there. She could not send much money, but enclosed enough to help with stage fare if they found a safe route. Mara read it once. Then again. The words did not feel like rescue. They felt like a road opening in the opposite direction of her heart. Lillian did not ask to see the letter. Well, she says we may still come. Caleb's hand tightened around the stove iron. He set it down gently, too gently. That is good, he said. Mara looked at him. His face was calm in the way. A man's face becomes calm when he is holding it so with both hands. Yes, Mara said, it is good. Lillian sipped her tea. Good things can still be unwelcome when they arrive late. Caleb reached for his hat. I need to check the south pasture. The south pasture was there yesterday, Lillian said. It remains demanding. He left before Mara could speak. The door closed softly behind him. Mara stood with the letter in her hand, listening to his boots cross the porch and descend the steps. Lillian waited until the sound faded. There is your clear road, dear heart. Mara turned to her. It does not feel clear. It is clearer than the night you asked him from fear. Mara looked down at Ada's careful handwriting. If we go, you will have kin, work, a town where people expected us. And if we stay? Mara did not answer. Lillian placed her cup down. If we stay, I will have sunlight on that porch, soil to insult, a doctor close enough to scold, and a young man who makes tea badly but faithfully. You will have work, gossip you have already survived, a mayor who pretends not to like you, and Caleb Rusk. Mohammed. I listed him last for dramatic effect. Mara pressed the letter against her apron. I cannot choose for both of us. No, Lillian said, but do not hide behind me to avoid choosing for yourself. The words were gentle, but they landed firmly. Lillian leaned back, tired from the morning already. I am old enough to know that a place with blood kin is not always home, and a stranger's porch can become one if love is allowed to sit there long enough. Mara's eyes filled. Do you want Idaho? Lillian asked. I wanted it when it was the only door I could see. And now? Mara looked toward the window. Caleb was saddling his horse by the barn, his movements controlled and quiet. He did not look toward the house. Now I see another door, she whispered. Then decide whether you are standing before it because you cannot bear the road, or because you want what waits inside. Mara folded the letter and set it on the table. All day Caleb kept his distance. He did not act coldly. Caleb did not seem capable of cruelty, even in pain. He carried water for Lillian, mended a broken latch, checked the horses, and spoke when spoken to. But a politeness came over him that reminded Mara painfully of the first days, when she had been Miss Vale in his kitchen, and he had been Mr. Rusk at the doorway. By evening she had endured enough. She found him at the corral, the same place where she had asked the first desperate question that had changed them both. The sun was low, turning the dusk gold around his boots. Juniper stood near the fence, nosing his sleeve for grain he did not have. Caleb rested one forearm on the rail and looked out across the pasture as though the answer to something might be written in cattle tracks. Myra approached slowly. "Mr. Rusk." He closed his eyes briefly at the return to formality. Then he turned. "Miss Vale." That hurt more than she expected. She held up the letter. "You left before I could finish saying what this meant." "I thought it plain enough." "Did you?" "Your cousin can take you in. That is what you wanted when you came west." "When I came west, I wanted my mother safe in some place to stand." "Idaho can give you that." "Yes." He looked away. Mara stepped closer to the fence. "Is that all you have to say?" "What else should I say?" "The truth, perhaps." His mouth tightened. "The truth is that I am glad you have a choice." "You look miserable about it." "I can be both." The answer was so Caleb that her anger softened before it could rise. He took off his hat and held it in both hands as he had the night he refused her. "Mara, I meant what I said. I will not be one more man narrowing your choices. If Idaho is safest, I will help you get there. If money is short, I will make up the difference. If you need an escort, I will take you as far as Clearwater Crossing myself and turn back without making it harder than it already is. And if I do not want you to turn back." His eyes lifted to hers. Mara's heart beat hard, but not with panic. There was no sickbed terror driving her now. No storm. No driver gone in the night. No town gossip sharp enough to decide her life. Her mother was healing. A letter waited on the kitchen table. A road to kin had opened. She had a choice. That was why this moment trembled with such power. "I am not asking tonight," she said softly. Caleb looked as if the words both relieved and disappointed him again. Mara stepped nearer. "But I want you to understand something before I do." His breath changed. "The first time I asked, I was trying to escape being alone. I can admit that now. I saw your decency and reached for it like a frightened person reaches for a lantern in the dark. You were right not to let me mistake that for a vow." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. "This time, if I ask, it will be because I have a road away and still choose this porch. Because my mother can travel one day and I still choose the garden she started here. Because I have kin in Idaho and still choose the man who treated my fear as something worth protecting instead of something to use." The wind moved lightly through the corral. Juniper lifted her head, then wandered away, as if even the horse had the sense to leave them alone. Caleb's voice was rough. "Myra." She shook her head gently. "Not yet. Let me finish becoming certain out loud." His eyes shone in the evening light. "I will be here when you are," he said. That night Mara wrote 2 letters. The first was to Ada Hensley in Idaho. She thanked her cousin for her kindness, explained that Lillian had survived the fever and was recovering at Mercy Ridge Ranch, and said they would not continue west for now. She did not write forever. Forever was too large for ink before the heart had spoken its final word. But she wrote that they had found honest shelter, fair work, and a place where healing had begun. The second letter had no address. She wrote it slowly by lamplight while Lillian slept in the chair nearby, and Caleb's boots sounded faintly on the porch outside. "Dear Father, I have been angry with you." Her hand shook after that first line, but she kept writing. She wrote of the debts, the shame, the road west, the wagon wreck, her mother's fever. She wrote that his choices had left them frightened, but they had not left them worthless. She wrote that she was learning a home could be chosen with clear eyes, not borrowed against in secret. She wrote that love without honesty could leave ruins, but honesty with love could build again from almost nothing. When she finished, tears dotted the page. Lillian opened her eyes. "Is that to him?" Myra nodded. "Will you send it?" "There is nowhere to send it." "Then what will you do?" Myra looked toward the stove, where the fire burned steady. Keep it, she said, but differently. Lillian smiled with tired pride. That is healing, dear heart. Before bed, Mara stepped onto the porch. Caleb stood at the rail, looking toward the dark garden bed. I wrote to Ada, she said. He turned. I told her we are staying for now. For now, he repeated. For now, she said, then smiled softly. Do not look wounded. A woman who is learning certainty must be honest about the road beneath her feet. He nodded, accepting even the part that hurt. Fair enough. Mara looked toward the stars. I also wrote to my father. Caleb did not ask what she had said. He only stood beside her, giving the silence room. After a while, she said, I think forgiveness may not be the same as excusing. No, Caleb said, I do not think it is. And staying may not be the same as having nowhere else to go. His gaze moved to her. No, he said softly, it is not. Inside, Lillian called, I hear wisdom on the porch. Bring some in before it spoils. Mara laughed, and Caleb did too, quietly but truly. The sound warmed the dark. Later, when the house had gone still, Mara placed her father's letter in the desk beside the once blank page she had never sent to Idaho. 2 letters now rested there, both proof of roads she had survived and roads she had chosen not to take. Outside, beneath the moon, the marigold bed waited. And under the soil, unseen by all of them, the first green root broke open. The first marigold broke through the soil on a Thursday morning. It was no more than a green hook pushing up beside the porch stones Caleb had laid, small enough that a careless boot could have ended it. But Lillian saw it from her chair and called for Mara as if gold had been found in the yard. There, she said, pointing with Abigail the cane. I told you this land only needed to be asked properly. Mara knelt beside the garden bed, smiling at the brave little shoot. The morning sun rested warm on her shoulders. The air smelled of coffee, damp earth, and hay. Behind her, Caleb came from the barn carrying a bucket, then stopped when he saw both women bent over the dirt. What happened? He asked. Your ranch has improved itself, Lillian said. Caleb stepped closer and looked down at the tiny green sprout. For a moment, no one spoke. It was only a flower beginning, only a seed doing what seeds were made to do, yet Mara felt the weight of it. Something hidden had taken root. Something patient had trusted darkness long enough to rise. Caleb looked at her, and she knew he felt it too. After breakfast, Mara placed Ada Hensley's letter in Caleb's desk beside the 2 others, the blank page she had never sent, and the letter she had written to her father. Caleb's old apology to his mother remained in the barn, but no longer like a punishment. The house seemed full of quiet papers now, each one marking a life that had turned. Lillian watched Mara close the desk drawer. You have decided, her mother said. Mara turned, yes. Fully. Yes. Not because I am too weak to travel. No. Not because town has tired you. No. Not because Caleb Rusk has shoulders broad enough to make poor judgment look tempting. Mama. Lillian smiled, but her eyes were wet. I had to be sure. Mara crossed the room and knelt beside her mother's chair. I am not choosing shelter. I am choosing home, and I am choosing him if he will still have me. Lillian touched her daughter's cheek. Dear heart, that man has been waiting with both hands open and pretending they were only resting at his sides. Mara laughed softly, but her hands trembled. Not from panic this time. From the sighs of joy. She found Caleb near the corral as evening began to soften the land. It was the same place where fear had first driven her to ask too soon. The same fence rail. The same wide pasture beyond. But Mara was not the same woman who had stood there before with terror in her throat and her future cornered like a frightened animal. Caleb turned when he heard her steps. Mara, he said. She carried the dented tin cup in both hands. She had washed it clean, though the creek bed had left marks that would never come out. "I found you here the first time," she said. His face grew still. "Yes. I asked badly. You asked honestly for the fear you were in. And you answered better than I deserved." "No," he said gently. "I answered as you deserved." The words steadied her. Mara looked down at the cup. "This was in my hand when I thought I had nothing left. I thought if I could keep giving Mama water, I could keep the world from taking her. I know now a cup cannot save a life by itself." Caleb's eyes softened with old understanding. "But love can be held in small things," she continued. "A cup of water, a clean cloth, tea made every morning, a chair set in the sun, a man taking off his hat before he says the truth." Caleb's hand tightened on the fence rail. Mara stepped closer. "I have a cousin in Idaho. I have a road west if I want it. My mother is strong enough to heal, and one day she may be strong enough to travel. I am not trapped here, Caleb. I am not cornered. I am not asking because the dark has left me no other door." She lifted her eyes to his. "I am asking because this is the door I choose." The evening wind moved through the pasture grass. "Marry me," Mara said. "Not from fear, not from gratitude, not because you saved my mother, though I will thank God for that all my days. Marry me because I love you, Caleb Rusk, because your kindness is not soft in the weak way but strong in the holy way, because you gave me time to learn my own heart. Because when I picture home now, I see my mother on your porch, marigolds by the steps, and you coming in at dusk with dust on your boots and honesty in your eyes." Caleb stood motionless, as if the whole world had gone quiet enough for one answer. Then he removed his hat. This time there was no sorrow in the gesture, only reverence. "Yes," he said. Mara's breath caught. He came to her slowly, stopping close enough that the tin cup rested between them like a witness. "Yes, Mara Vale, with my whole heart clear, with no fear speaking for me, with no loneliness pretending to be duty. I love you. I think I began loving you before I had the courage to call it by its name." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. Caleb touched the dented cup lightly. "May I?" She gave it to him. He held it in one hand and took her hand with the other. His palm was warm, rough, and steady. From the porch came Lillian's voice, carrying across the yard with suspicious brightness. If that was a proposal, someone had better tell the recovering mother before she walks over there and ruins the tenderness. Mara laughed, and Caleb bowed his head, overcome. They crossed the yard together. Lillian sat wrapped in her shawl, her face pale but shining. When Mara knelt beside her, Lillian placed one hand on her daughter's cheek and the other on Caleb's sleeve. "You asked from love," she said. Mara nodded, "From certainty." Lillian looked at Caleb, "And you answered from the same." "Yes, ma'am." "Then you have my blessing, and my warning. She is stubborn, tender-hearted, and terrible at pretending she does not care." Caleb smiled. "I had noticed." "And he," Lillian said to Mara, "will hide kindness under chores unless watched closely." "I had noticed too." They were married in autumn, when the marigolds bloomed bright beside the porch, and Mercy Ridge looked at last like someone hoped to remain in it. Reverend Albright stood beneath a cottonwood near the house. Peter cried and denied it. Mrs. Tabor brought a quilt. Mrs. Pike came with jam, and an apology so stiff that Lillian accepted both with royal mercy. Caleb placed his mother's handkerchief around Mara's bouquet. Mara tied the dented tin cup with a ribbon and set it on the wedding table beside a lamp burning low in the golden afternoon. Lillian sat in a chair of honor, strong enough to smile through the vows and sharp enough to correct Peter when he stepped on the flowers. Later, as sunset poured over the ranch, Caleb told Mara that for years he had thought home was only the place where grief had left him behind. Mara took his hand and told him home was not a house untouched by sorrow. It was the place where sorrow was no longer asked to sit alone. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to ask why an old tin cup sat on the kitchen shelf, Mara would tell her that it had once held water beside a sickbed, fear beside a broken wagon, and finally love beside a promise freely chosen. And every spring, marigolds returned beside the porch. Subscribe for more romantic Wild West stories, where love, grief, and second chances meet on the frontier. The final image of Mercy Ridge was never the wedding, though the wedding was beautiful. It was Caleb at dusk, Mara beside him, Lillian laughing from the porch, the old tin cup shining in the window, and the house no longer quiet in the way loneliness makes a house quiet. It was quiet in the way peace is quiet. True love is not taken from fear, it is chosen in certainty.